When you think of cars, you probably imagine sleek sedans, powerful sports cars, or maybe a dependable SUV. But what happens when car makers toss logic out the window and start chasing bizarre dreams? Over the last century, some cars have looked less like vehicles and more like science experiments gone wild. Would you dare to drive something that looks like a spaceship, a toy, or even a piece of furniture? Let's dive into the weirdest rides ever built. Peel P50 1962. Let's kick things off with the world's smallest production car, the Peel P50. Built in the early 1960s on the Isle of Man, this tiny machine was less a car and more like a rolling shoebox. Just 54 inches long and 41 inches wide, it was marketed as the ultimate city car. The company proudly advertised that it could fit one adult and a shopping bag. Yes, that's the actual sales pitch. Its single headlight, 3 wheels, and flimsy motorcycle engine gave it a top speed of around 38 miles per hour. Not exactly something you'd want to race on the highway. But the real kicker, it had no reverse gear. Drivers literally had to pick it up by a rear handle and drag it backward like luggage. Imagine pulling into a parking spot and then having to physically lift your car out of it. Despite its absurd size, the Peel P50 became a cult classic. Collectors today pay over $100,000 for one, proving that sometimes weird sells. And yes, it even made its way into the Guinness World Records as the smallest car ever built. It wasn't practical, it wasn't fast, but it was unforgettable. Sometimes being ridiculous is the whole point. Sbarro Autobau 80er Jahre. If the Peel P50 was small and silly, the Sbarro Autobau was its opposite. Wild, asymmetrical, and confusing from every angle. Created by Swiss designer Franco Sbarro, this bizarre vehicle looked like 3 different cars stitched together after a late-night dare. One side was longer than the other, the headlights seemed misplaced, and the back looked like it belonged on a different model altogether. Sbarro was known for eccentric prototypes, but the Autobau felt like an art installation more than a drivable machine. Under the hood, though, it was no joke. It used a powerful mid-mounted BMW engine, meaning it could actually hit impressive speeds. The clash between serious performance and laughably strange design made it one of the oddest hybrids of form and function in car history. What made it weirder was that Sbarro didn't just design 1 or 2. They built several variations, each more baffling than the last. Car enthusiasts couldn't decide if it was genius or madness. Today, it survives mostly as a museum curiosity, rarely spotted outside of auto shows. The Autobau proved one thing. Just because you can design something doesn't always mean you should. Still, it forced people to question what a car could look like, and maybe that was Sbarro's goal all along. General Motors Firebird. Year 1953. Now imagine pulling up to a stoplight in what looks like a jet fighter with wheels. That was the GM Firebird E, a 1953 concept car that asked, why not put a jet engine in an automobile? The result was a sleek, rocket-shaped machine with a massive tail fin and a cockpit canopy that made the driver feel like a test pilot. It wasn't just for show. This thing ran on a gas turbine engine producing over 370 horsepower. In theory, it could reach outrageous speeds, but in practice, it was almost impossible to control. Test drivers reported that it was terrifying to handle, and one nearly crashed simply trying to shift gears. Unsurprisingly, GM realized it wasn't exactly a family-friendly commuter car. Still, the Firebird made headlines worldwide and became a symbol of America's obsession with jet-age technology in the 1950s. It inspired a whole series of GM Firebird concepts, each equally outlandish. Looking back, it's hard not to admire the audacity. They weren't building for the market, they were building for pure imagination. The Firebird. I never went into production, and thank goodness, because the highways weren't ready for mini fighter jets zipping around. But as a piece of automotive theater, it remains one of the most jaw-dropping cars ever built. Stout Scarab, 1936. Long before minivans became the family car of choice, there was the Stout Scarab, often called the world's first minivan. But this wasn't the kind of van you'd expect to see in a suburban driveway. Designed by William Stout in the 1930s, the Scarab looked like a rolling beetle, with a bulbous aluminum body that made it look completely alien for its time. Inside, though, it was decades ahead. The Scarab featured a flexible interior with removable seats, turning it into a lounge on wheels. Imagine having a mini living room where passengers could sit face to face while traveling down the road. Even the dashboard and steering wheel looked like something from the future. But here's the catch. It was wildly expensive. At around $5,000 during the Great Depression, it cost as much as a house. Only 9 were ever built, making it rarer than most Ferraris today. Despite its failure in the marketplace, the Scarab influenced the design of later vans and multi-purpose vehicles. Looking at it now, you might laugh at its bug-like shape. But Stout wasn't trying to be weird for the sake of it. He was trying to reinvent personal travel. The Scarab wasn't a hit, but it was a vision of things to come, wrapped in the body of a strange mechanical insect. Aurora Safety Car, 1957. Now here's one that feels more like a prank than an invention. The Aurora Safety Car was built in 1957 by a Catholic priest named Alfred Giuliano, who was obsessed with designing the safest car in the world. What he ended up with looked like a swollen spaceship on wheels, complete with awkward bubble windows and a bulbous front end that made it look like it was melting. Giuliano's idea wasn't entirely crazy. The Aurora included seatbelts, padded interiors, and even a built-in roll cage. Innovations that were revolutionary in the 1950s. Unfortunately, it also came with serious flaws. The car was massive, heavy, and underpowered, making it nearly undrivable. Worse, it was so ugly that autocritics at the time called it the world's ugliest car. Only one Aurora was ever made, and it nearly bankrupted Giuliano's parish as he poured all his funds into the project. For decades, the car sat abandoned until it was finally restored and displayed in museums as a cautionary tale. The Aurora proved that safety was important, but design mattered too. No one wanted to drive a car that looked like a mutant potato, no matter how many seatbelts it had. Still, it's remembered as one of the strangest, boldest experiments in car history. Peugeot Onyx Concept, 2012. Sometimes car designers don't just build a vehicle, they build a statement. Enter the Peugeot Onyx Concept, unveiled in 2012. At first glance, it looked like a futuristic supercar ready for a sci-fi blockbuster. But then you notice the body panels. Half of them weren't painted, they were made of pure copper. Not polished copper either, just raw metal meant to age, tarnish, and change color over time. The idea was wild. Let the car literally rust with style. Instead of keeping it pristine, the designers wanted it to develop a natural patina, turning each model into something unique. Inside, it didn't get any less eccentric. The cabin was built from compressed recycled newspaper, giving it a felt-like texture. It looked more like modern art than a dashboard. Performance-wise, it was no joke. The Onyx packed a hybrid V8 engine with nearly 600 horsepower. It was as fast as it was beautiful, but Peugeot never intended it for production. The car existed purely as a design experiment, meant to push boundaries and spark conversation. The Onyx left people divided. Some loved the bravery of letting a car age naturally, while others thought it was madness to let corrosion be part of the design. Either way, it ensured the Onyx would never be forgotten. Because when your car starts turning green and brown like an old penny, you know you've built something truly weird. Reliant Robin 1973. If there's one car that became famous purely for how ridiculous it looked and handled, it's the Reliant Robin. Built in Britain in the early 1970s, this little three-wheeler looked like a cross between a toy car and a budget experiment gone wrong. With one wheel in the front and two at the back, the Robin had a reputation for tipping over at the slightest turn. It wasn't exactly a powerhouse either. Its tiny engine produced less than 40 horsepower, barely enough to keep up with traffic. But here's the strange twist. People actually loved it. Because it was technically classified as a motorcycle, drivers could pay lower taxes and insurance. For working-class families, it was an affordable way to own something that looked like a car, even if it handled like a tricycle on steroids. Over time, the Robin became a cult icon, thanks in part to comedy shows like Top Gear, which frequently used it for skits showing the car rolling over dramatically. Despite being the butt of jokes, it sold surprisingly well, with hundreds of thousands built over 3 decades. The Reliant Robin might not have been practical, but it earned its place in weird car history. It wasn't just a car, it was a punchline you could drive. BMW Gina Light Visionary 2008. Imagine a car with skin. That's not science fiction. It's exactly what BMW tried with the Gina Light Visionary, a concept car unveiled in 2008. Instead of a traditional metal body, the Gina was wrapped in a flexible fabric that could stretch and shift depending on the situation. Think of it like a superhero suit for a car. Using hidden mechanical structures underneath, the fabric body could literally change shape. The headlights opened like eyelids. Vents could appear and disappear, and the whole silhouette could morph at the driver's command. It was the ultimate shapeshifter on wheels. BMW claimed this was about emotional design, making a car that could adapt like a living thing. While it sounded groundbreaking, the Gina also raised practical questions. What happens in a hailstorm? What if someone pokes it with a key? Not exactly problems you want for a daily driver. Still, the Gina stunned the automotive world. It wasn't about practicality. It was about reimagining what a car could be. No one else had dared to make a vehicle that behaved like a living organism. It remains one of the strangest, most daring prototypes ever created. The Gina might never hit the streets, but it proved that sometimes the weirdest ideas are the ones that stick in your memory forever. Dodge Diora, 1965. Some cars look like they were designed for aliens, and the Dodge Diora was one of them. This bizarre custom build was unveiled in 1965, and from the side, it looked futuristic and sleek. But then you tried to figure out how to get in. Spoiler: there were no traditional doors. Instead, entry came through the front windshield, which tilted up like a hatch. Drivers and passengers had to crawl in from the front, almost like boarding a spaceship. It was wildly impractical, but undeniably cool. The Diora was built by the Alexander brothers for the Detroit Autorama car show, and it actually won awards for its design. Underneath the strange shell was a Dodge 100 pickup truck, though you'd never know it from looking. It had a lowered, stretched body with surf-inspired styling, making it look like something out of a 1960s sci-fi beach movie. The car was never mass-produced, but it achieved cult status. Mattel even made it one of the original Hot Wheels cars in 1968, cementing its place in pop culture. The Dodge Diora wasn't about practicality, it was about pure showmanship. Crawling through the windshield may not sound convenient, but in terms of weirdness, it's hard to beat. Tasco 1948. World War II had just ended, and aviation was on everyone's mind. Enter the Tasco, a 1948 prototype that looked like a hybrid between a car and an airplane. The front wheels were covered with pods shaped like jet turbines, and the cockpit was enclosed with a canopy straight out of a fighter plane. But the weirdest part was inside. Instead of a steering wheel, the Tasco had an airplane-style yoke. Drivers weren't so much steering as they were piloting. The car also introduced something that would later become common: the T-top roof with removable glass panels. That was genuinely ahead of its time. Unfortunately, everything else about the Tasco was awkward. The design was bulky, the performance was underwhelming, and let's face it, nobody wanted to drive something that looked like a grounded bomber. Only one prototype was ever built, and it quickly faded into obscurity. Still, the Tasco deserves credit for daring to merge aviation style with road travel. It wasn't a success, but it did leave behind ideas that shaped future car design. Sometimes weirdness is just the first step toward innovation. Messerschmitt Coehr, 1955. When an aircraft company decides to make a car, you know it's going to be unusual. After World War II, Messerschmitt wasn't allowed to build planes, so they turned their engineering skills toward microcars. The result was the Messerschmitt KR200, a three-wheeled bubble car that looked more like a cockpit with wheels than an automobile. The KR200 had a single row of tandem seating, meaning the passenger sat directly behind the driver like in a fighter jet. The canopy flipped open like an aircraft hatch, and inside it had aircraft-style controls. Powered by a tiny one-cylinder engine, it could barely hit 56 miles per hour. But that was enough for post-war Europe, where fuel efficiency mattered more than speed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was affordable, and thousands were sold during the 1950s. Still, its insect-like appearance and cramped interior made it one of the oddest sights on the road. Imagine cruising down the street in what looked like a glass-topped torpedo with wheels. The KR200 has since become a collector's favorite, partly because of its quirkiness and partly because of its place in post-war history. It wasn't fast, it wasn't pretty, but it was a practical solution that looked hilariously out of place. Sometimes weird design is born from necessity, and in this case, desperation turned into a rolling legend. Toyota Setsuna, 2016. Wooden cars don't usually mix, but Toyota thought differently. In 2016, they unveiled the Toyota Setsuna, a concept car made almost entirely out of wood. Yes, wood. From the body panels to the seats and even parts of the frame, this car looked more like fine furniture than an automobile. The name Setsuna means moment in Japanese, and the idea was that the car would age gracefully, passing through generations like a family heirloom. Over time, the wood would develop cracks, textures, and colors unique to each vehicle, making every Setsuna one of a kind. Instead of nails or screws, the car was assembled using traditional Japanese joinery techniques, the same methods used in temples and shrines. That meant the car could be disassembled and rebuilt with relative ease. As for performance, it wasn't meant to be a daily driver. It ran on a small electric motor, more for demonstration than practicality. Critics called it impractical, but fans admired its bold artistic statement. The Setsuna wasn't about horsepower or speed. It was about memory, craftsmanship, and time. A car that grows old with you, like a wooden watch or a leather chair. Weird? Absolutely. But also strangely poetic. Ferrari 512S, Modulo 1970. Ferrari is known for elegant supercars, but the 512S Modulo was something else entirely. Unveiled at the 1970 Geneva Motor Show, it looked more like a spacecraft than a car. With its ultra-flat wedge design and canopy-style entry, it sat barely 3 feet off the ground. From some angles, it looked like a futuristic pancake with wheels. Underneath the radical shell, however, it packed serious power. A 5.0-liter V12 engine capable of producing around 550 horsepower gave it incredible performance for its time. The Modulo could reportedly hit speeds of over 200 miles per hour. though it was never intended for actual racing. Getting in and out was another story. Instead of doors, the entire canopy slid forward, allowing the driver and passenger to crawl inside, like astronauts boarding a capsule. It wasn't exactly practical for a trip to the grocery store. The Modulo was a pure design exercise, a chance for Ferrari and Pininfarina to showcase their most extreme ideas. It was celebrated at the time for its daring look and even won design awards. Decades later, it remains one of the most iconic concept cars ever made, not because it was useful, but because it looked like nothing else on Earth. Weird can sometimes become timeless. Rinspeed Suba 2008. Ever wish you could drive your car straight into a lake and keep going? Swiss company Rinspeed decided to make that fantasy real with the Scuba, the world's first real underwater car. Inspired by James Bond's Lotus submarine in The Spy Who Loved Me, the Scuba could not only drive on land, but also submerge and cruise underwater like a tiny submersible. The design was based on a Lotus Elise, but heavily modified. The Scuba used electric motors to drive both on land and in water, with twin propellers and jet drives to move it underwater. The cabin wasn't pressurized like a submarine. You actually had to wear scuba gear to breathe, while piloting it under the surface. On land, it behaved like a normal sports car. On water, it floated like a boat. And under the water, it became something out of science fiction. Rinspeed claimed it was built to show how versatile electric vehicles could be, though in reality it was more of a publicity stunt. Only one Scuba was ever built, but it grabbed headlines around the world. Weird? Definitely. Practical? Not at all. But if you ever wanted to live out your Bond fantasy, this was the closest you could get. Dymaxion car, 1933. Long before Elon Musk made headlines with futuristic vehicles, inventor Buckminster Fuller created the Dymaxion car in 1933. It was a massive, teardrop-shaped machine that looked like a cross between a bus and a spaceship. With 3 wheels and a body that stretched 20 feet long, the Dymaxion was meant to be the car of the future. Its aerodynamic design allowed it to reach speeds of up to 90 miles per hour, impressive for the era. It could seat up to 11 passengers, making it part car, part bus. But the real oddity was the steering. Instead of turning the front wheels, the rear wheel did the steering, making it notoriously difficult to control. During a demonstration at the 1933 World's Fair, a Dymaxion tipped over in a fatal accident, souring public perception. Despite that, Fuller remained convinced that his design was decades ahead of its time. In some ways, he was right. The teardrop shape later influenced future vehicles and even aircraft. Only 3 Dymaxions were ever built, but their legacy lives on as one of the boldest, strangest experiments in car history. It was visionary, dangerous, and unforgettable all at once. Spira 4U 2014. Most cars are designed with steel and aluminum, but the Spira 4U from Thailand went in a completely different direction, foam. Yes, this oddball was basically a foam car. Built in 2014, the lightweight vehicle was designed to improve safety by absorbing impacts like a giant bumper. The body was made from reinforced foam and fiberglass, making it much lighter than traditional vehicles. At just over 300 pounds, the Spira 4U weighed less than some motorcycles. It ran on either a small gasoline engine or an electric motor, depending on the version, and was meant for city commuting rather than highways. The design philosophy was unusual but practical in its own way. Thailand has high road accident rates, and the Spira 4U's creators wanted a car that could reduce injuries. The foam shell was also waterproof, allowing the car to float in floods, a handy feature in parts of Southeast Asia. Of course, the look was far from conventional. With its rounded edges and toy-like proportions, the Spira 4U resembled a child's bumper car that somehow escaped the carnival. While it never reached mass production, it stood out as a rare attempt to rethink vehicle safety from the ground up. In the end, it wasn't speed, luxury, or power that made the Spira 4U memorable. It was foam. Sometimes, the weirdest ideas come from the simplest materials. Cadillac Cyclone, 1959. The 1950s were all about the jet age, and the Cadillac Cyclone was GM's futuristic vision of cars taking flight, minus the wings. With its bubble, canopy, giant nose cones, and sleek rocket-like body, the Cyclone looked ready to blast off from the driveway. But the most bizarre feature wasn't the styling, it was the radar crash avoidance system. Yes, in 1959, Cadillac tried to invent self-driving safety tech. The twin cones at the front housed radar sensors designed to detect obstacles and prevent collisions. The problem? The technology was nowhere near ready. The sensors barely worked, and the system was more show than substance. Inside, the car was just as space-age. It featured push-button controls, futuristic seats, and enough chrome to blind you in the sunlight. Unfortunately, its impracticality kept it from going beyond the prototype stage. Despite its flaws, the Cyclone showed that automakers were already dreaming about tech that wouldn't become mainstream for another 60 years. As crash sensors, driver alerts, and futuristic styling are now everyday features. Back then, they looked like pure science fiction. The Cyclone proved that even if you can't predict the future perfectly, aiming for it can still leave an unforgettable mark. Sinclair C. 51985. The 1980s brought plenty of bold inventions, but few were stranger than the Sinclair C5. Marketed as the car of the future, it turned out to be more like a plastic toy on wheels. Created by British inventor Sir Clive Sinclair, the C5 was an electric trike with pedals, designed for short city trips. The problem? It sat incredibly low to the ground, so low that drivers were practically at bumper height with passing cars. Safety concerns were immediate, and many people joked that it was less a car and more a rolling death trap. Its top speed of just 15 miles per hour didn't help its reputation. The C5 was also open air, leaving drivers exposed to rain, wind, and exhaust fumes from larger vehicles. Despite heavy marketing, the public wasn't convinced. Sales flopped, and the C5 became one of the most notorious product failures of the decade. But here's the twist. Today, collectors pay thousands for surviving models, and some retrofitted versions even outperform the original specs. It may have been mocked in its time, but the Sinclair C5 has become a cult icon. Sometimes failure makes a car even more legendary. Heinkel Cabine, 1956. Another strange micro-car from post-war Europe, the Heinkel Cabine looked more like a plane escape pod than a road vehicle. Built by German aircraft company Heinkel, it followed the same bubble car trend as the Messerschmitt, but with its own quirks. The cabine featured a single front hinge door that opened outward, meaning you literally entered through the front of the car. Inside, space was so tight that two passengers felt like sardines in a can. Powered by a tiny single-cylinder engine, it barely hit 50 miles per hour, making it more suited for small-town roads than highways. Heinkel promoted the cabine as an affordable solution for families who couldn't afford full-sized cars. But its odd look and cramped design meant it never really took off in sales. Still, it became an important part of the microcar craze that swept Europe during the 1950s and 60s. Today, the cabine is seen as equal parts adorable and ridiculous. It's too small to be practical, too awkward to be stylish, and too rare to ignore. Weirdness, in this case, became its lasting charm. Faraday Future FF0, 2016. Finally, we land in the modern era with the Faraday Future FF01, a concept car that looked like it drove straight out of a video game. Unveiled in 2016 by startup Faraday Future, This electric prototype was sculpted with extreme aerodynamics, sharp curves, and a glowing cockpit that made it look more like the Batmobile than anything destined for public roads. Inside, the steering wheel housed a built-in smartphone dock, and the car promised advanced AI driving features. Its futuristic design claimed to push beyond Tesla and reimagine what electric supercars could be. But the strangest part? Nobody could actually buy one. Faraday Future was struggling financially, and the F-01 was more of a marketing stunt than a serious production plan. It appeared at auto shows, wowed crowds, and then disappeared just as quickly. Still, it left a mark. The FF-01 showed how far companies were willing to go to stand out in the electric car race. It may never have hit the streets, but it remains one of the weirdest, most futuristic prototypes ever revealed. Sometimes all it takes is one wild concept to get the world talking. And there you have it, 20 of the weirdest cars ever to roll, float, or wobble their way into history. From foam bodies to jet engines and bubble canopies, these machines prove that innovation often walks hand in hand with madness. Which one blew your mind the most? Drop your pick in the comments, hit subscribe, and share this video with a fellow car lover. Because the world of cars, it only gets stranger.